Welcome to Sinister States.
You never really know a place until you've lived in it. That's what Rachel told herself as she stood in the middle of her new apartment, surrounded by boxes and the faint, musty scent of old wood and rain. She was 26, finally on her own, and the world felt wide open. The apartment was small, just 2 rooms and a kitchen, with a bathroom tucked away behind a narrow door, but it was hers. After years of sharing space with roommates, of tiptoeing around other people's messes and moods, she was ready for solitude. She was ready for peace. The building was old, a 3-story walk-up on Willow Lane, with faded brick and windows that rattled in the wind. The landlord, a wiry man with a smoker's cough, had shown her around with a set of jangling keys and a practiced smile. "It's got character," he'd said, as if that explained the creaky floors and the way the hallway light flickered when you walked past. Rachel didn't mind. She liked old things. She liked the idea of living somewhere with a history, somewhere that had seen other lives before hers. The first night, she unpacked her boxes, made herself a cup of tea, and sat on the couch, listening to the rain tap against the glass. The city outside was quiet, muffled by the storm. She called her mom, told her how happy she was, and went to bed with a smile on her face. That night, she dreamed of water. She was standing in a hallway, the walls peeling and warped, the floorboards slick beneath her feet. Water was rising around her ankles, cold and dark, swirling with bits of debris. She tried to move, but her feet were stuck, rooted to the spot. The water climbed higher, lapping at her knees, her waist, her chest. She heard voices, muffled and distant, like someone calling her name from underwater. She tried to scream, but her mouth filled with water, and she woke up gasping, tangled in her sheets, her heart pounding. She laughed it off. First night jitters, she thought. New place, new dreams. She made coffee, opened the windows to let in the morning air, and tried to shake off the feeling of drowning, but the dreams didn't stop. Every night, she found herself back in that hallway, the water colder, deeper, pulling her down. Sometimes she saw faces in the water, pale and blurred, floating just out of reach. Sometimes she heard laughter, sharp and cruel, echoing off the walls. She started waking up exhausted, her sheets twisted and damp with sweat. After a week, she noticed something strange. She'd find damp footprints on the bathroom floor, even though she hadn't showered. Once, she found her slippers soaked through, as if she'd walked through a puddle in her sleep. She checked the pipes, the ceiling, the windows. Nothing was leaking. She told herself it was just her imagination, that she was sleepwalking, that she'd spilled water and forgotten. But then things got stranger. She started hearing noises at night, soft splashing, like someone wading through water in the next room. She'd get up, turn on the lights, and find nothing. The air would feel heavy, humid, like the inside of a steam room. Sometimes she'd catch a whiff of something foul, like stagnant pond water. One night, she woke to the sound of someone crying. It was faint, but unmistakable, a woman's voice, sobbing somewhere close. Rachel sat up, her skin prickling. The crying grew louder, echoing through the apartment. She followed the sound to the bathroom, where the tub was full of water, even though she hadn't run a bath. The water was dark, almost black, and something was moving just beneath the surface. Rachel ran. She grabbed her keys, her phone, and bolted out the door in her pajamas. She spent the night in her car, shivering, watching the windows of her apartment for any sign of movement. In the morning, she called her landlord and demanded to know if anyone had died in the apartment. The landlord hesitated, then admitted that a woman had drowned in the bathtub years ago. An accident, he said. Or maybe not. Rachel moved out that day. She left half her things behind. She never went back, not even to pick up her mail. She said she still dreams of water sometimes, but at least now she wakes up dry. But that's just the surface of Rachel's story. The truth is, what happened in that apartment on Willow Lane was more than just a haunting. It was a slow unraveling, a steady drip of fear that seeped into every corner of her life. The first time Rachel noticed the water stains, she was cleaning the kitchen. She'd been there for 2 weeks, and the novelty of living alone had started to wear off. She was tired, irritable, snapping at her mother on the phone and ignoring texts from friends. She blamed it on work, on the stress of moving, on the endless rain that seemed to follow her everywhere. She was scrubbing the counter when she saw it, a dark stain spreading across the ceiling just above the sink. It was small at first, a faint outline like a shadow, but as she watched, it grew, the edges bleeding outward in slow, irregular lines. She reached up to touch it, half expecting her fingers to come away wet, but the plaster was dry and cold. She called the landlord, who promised to send someone to look at it. No one ever came. The stain grew larger over the next few days, branching out like the roots of a tree. Rachel started to feel uneasy in the kitchen, as if something was watching her from above. She stopped cooking, started eating takeout in the living room, her eyes flicking nervously to the ceiling every time she passed through. The dreams got worse. Now, when she woke up, her hair was damp, her pillow stained with water. She started sleeping with the lights on, a towel draped over her pillow, but it didn't help. The water found her anyway. One night, she woke to the sound of dripping. She sat up, heart racing, and listened. The sound was coming from the hallway. She got out of bed, her feet sinking into the damp carpet, and followed the noise. The hallway was dark, the only light coming from the bathroom at the end. The door was open, and the tub was overflowing, water spilling onto the floor in thick, sluggish waves. Rachel stared, frozen, as the water crept toward her, soaking her feet, her ankles, her calves. She tried to turn and run, but her legs wouldn't move. The water was cold, numbing, pulling her down. She heard the crying again, louder this time, echoing off the tiles. She saw a face in the water, pale and bloated, eyes wide and staring. Rachel screamed, and the world snapped back into focus. She was standing in the hallway, dry and shivering, the bathroom door closed. The sound of dripping was gone. She didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next day, she called her mother and begged her to come over. When her mother arrived, Rachel broke down in tears, telling her everything: the dreams, the water, the crying, the stains. Her mother listened, her face pale and drawn, and suggested that Rachel see a doctor. "Maybe it's stress," she said. "Maybe you're just overwhelmed." Rachel wanted to believe her. She wanted to believe that she was imagining things, that it was all in her head. But deep down, she knew better. She started spending more time out of the apartment, staying late at work, going to the gym, wandering the city until she was too tired to think. But every time she came home, the feeling of dread returned. The apartment felt smaller, darker, the air thick with humidity and the scent of mold. One evening, as she was unlocking her door, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned, but the hallway was empty. She hurried inside, locking the door behind her, and leaned against it, trying to catch her breath. That night, she dreamed of drowning again. But this time, she wasn't alone. She saw the woman, her hair floating around her face, her eyes wide and pleading. The woman reached out, grabbing Rachel's arm, pulling her down into the darkness. Rachel woke up screaming, her arm aching as if someone had squeezed it too hard. She turned on the light and saw bruises forming on her skin, dark and finger-shaped. She called the landlord again, demanding answers. He was evasive, mumbling about old buildings and faulty plumbing. When she pressed him, he finally admitted that a woman had died in the apartment years ago. She drowned in the tub, he said. It was ruled an accident, but, well, some people say she never really left. Rachel hung up and started packing. She didn't care about the lease, about the deposit, about the boxes she'd have to leave behind. She just wanted out. As she was leaving, she glanced back at the apartment one last time. The hallway was dark, the air heavy with the scent of water and decay. She thought she saw a shadow move in the bathroom, a pale face watching her from the darkness. She slammed the door and ran. Rachel moved in with her mother for a while, sleeping on the couch, jumping at every sound. She started seeing a therapist, trying to make sense of what had happened. She told herself it was just a bad dream, a trick of the mind, but the bruises on her arm told a different story. Months later, she heard that the apartment on Willow Lane was vacant again. The landlord was offering a discount, trying to lure in new tenants. Rachel wondered if anyone else would last as long as she did. She still dreams of water sometimes. She wakes up gasping, her sheets damp with sweat, her heart pounding. But at least now she wakes up dry. At least now she knows when to leave. David had always wanted a house with a porch. Not just any porch, but the kind that wrapped around the front and side, with enough space for a swing and a couple of rocking chairs. He imagined sitting there in the evenings, a cold drink in hand, watching his kids play in the yard while the sun set behind the old oak trees. When he and his wife, Sarah, found the house on Maple Street, it felt like a dream come true. It was a big, rambling place, built in the 1920s, with high ceilings and wide windows that let in the morning light. The paint was peeling, the floors creaked, and the basement smelled of earth and old secrets, but David didn't care. He saw potential. He saw a future. They moved in at the end of summer, just as the leaves were starting to turn. Their two kids, Emma and Jack, raced through the empty rooms, their laughter echoing off the bare walls. Sarah started planning paint colors and new curtains. David rolled up his sleeves and got to work, fixing leaky faucets, patching holes, and tearing up the old carpet to reveal the hardwood floors beneath. For a while, it was perfect. The house felt alive with possibility, every corner filled with the promise of new memories. They hosted a housewarming party, invited friends and neighbors, and toasted to new beginnings. At night, David would sit on the porch, listening to the crickets and the distant hum of traffic, feeling like he'd finally arrived. But as the days grew shorter and the nights grew colder, something in the house began to change. It started with the noises. At first, David thought it was just the house settling, the old wood shifting as the temperature dropped. But the sounds were too regular, too deliberate. Every night, around midnight, he'd hear footsteps on the basement stairs. Slow, heavy, one step at a time. He'd get up, grab a flashlight, and go down to check, but the basement would be empty, the air cold and still. Sarah started complaining about bad dreams. She'd wake up sweating, convinced that someone was standing at the foot of the bed. She said she felt watched, even during the day. The kids started refusing to go downstairs, even to fetch their toys. Emma said there was a man in the basement, watching her from the shadows. Jack started wetting the bed, something he hadn't done in years. David tried to brush it off. He told himself it was just the stress of moving, the adjustment to a new place. He told the kids that old houses made strange noises, that there was nothing to be afraid of. But he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. One night, he stayed up late, working on a project in the living room. The house was quiet, the only sound the ticking of the old clock on the mantel. At exactly midnight, he heard the footsteps. He froze, listening as they descended the basement stairs, one by one. He stood up, heart pounding, and walked to the basement door. He opened it slowly, the hinges squealing in protest. The stairs disappeared into darkness, the air thick with the scent of earth and mildew. He flicked on the light, but the bulb at the bottom of the stairs barely glowed, casting long, wavering shadows on the walls. He took a step down, then another, the wood groaning beneath his weight. The footsteps had stopped, but he could feel something watching him, just out of sight. He reached the bottom of the stairs and shone his flashlight around the basement. Boxes, old furniture, a rusted bike. Nothing out of the ordinary. He turned to go back upstairs, but as he reached the top step, he heard a whisper. It was so soft he almost missed it, a breath of sound that seemed to come from the far corner of the basement. "Get out." David spun around, shining his flashlight into the darkness. The beam caught on something, a face, pale and twisted, eyes wide and staring. He blinked, and it was gone. He slammed the basement door and locked it. He didn't sleep that night. The next morning, he tried to tell Sarah what had happened, but the words stuck in his throat. He didn't want to scare her, didn't want to admit that he was scared himself. Instead, he threw himself into work, fixing things that didn't need fixing, trying to ignore the growing sense of dread that clung to him like a second skin, but the house wouldn't let him forget. The noises got worse. He was standing at the foot of my bed. David held her until she stopped shaking, then checked every room in the house. He found nothing, but the feeling of being watched was stronger than ever. The next day, he started looking for a new place to live. He didn't tell Sarah at first. He didn't want to admit defeat, didn't want to give up on the house they'd worked so hard to make their own. But the fear in his daughter's eyes, the exhaustion in his wife's face, the way Jack clung to him at night, he couldn't ignore it anymore. He found a rental across town, a small, modern house with no basement. He signed the lease and started packing. On their last night in the house on Maple Street, David sat on the porch, watching the sun set behind the trees. The house was quiet, the air still. He felt a strange mix of relief and sadness, as if he was leaving behind more than just a building. As he stood up to go inside, he heard footsteps behind him. He turned, but the porch was empty. He felt a cold hand on his shoulder, a whisper in his ear, "Don't leave." He ran inside, locked the door, and didn't look back. They moved out the next day. David left the keys on the kitchen counter, the basement door locked tight. He never went back, not even to pick up the mail. Months later, he heard that the house was vacant again. The new owners had lasted less than a month before moving out. David wondered if the man in the basement was still there, waiting for someone else to come home. He still dreams of the house sometimes. He dreams of footsteps on the stairs, of cold hands reaching out from the darkness. He wakes up sweating, his heart pounding, and reminds himself that he's safe, that the house is far away. But sometimes, late at night, he thinks he hears footsteps in the hallway. He tells himself it's just the house settling, just the wind. But he never goes down to the basement. Not anymore. Mia had always been a light sleeper. Even as a child, the faintest creak of the floorboards or the distant hum of a passing car could pull her from the depths of sleep and leave her staring at the ceiling, heart pounding, waiting for the world to settle. So when she moved into the old apartment on the edge of campus, she told herself she'd get used to the sounds. She told herself that every building had its quirks, that the groans and sighs of old wood and plaster were just the house breathing, nothing more. She was 19, a sophomore, and this was her first time living away from home. The apartment was a faded yellow Victorian, split into 4 units, each with its own narrow staircase and crooked hallway. Mia's room was the smallest, tucked away at the end of the hall, just big enough for a twin bed, a desk, and a battered dresser she'd found at a thrift store. The window overlooked the alley, where the trash cans lined up like soldiers and the streetlight flickered all night long. Her roommates were friendly enough. There was Jess, a theater major with a laugh that could fill a room. Priya, who studied biology and kept her side of the fridge organized with military precision. And Lila, who was quiet, always wearing headphones, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. They weren't best friends, but they got along. They shared chores, split the bills, and sometimes watched movies together in the living room, their voices echoing off the high ceilings. The first night, Mia lay in bed, listening to the sounds of the building settling around her. She heard footsteps in the hallway, the soft click of a door closing, the distant rumble of a train. She drifted in and out of sleep, her dreams filled with strange, shifting shadows. In the morning, she found her door ajar. She was sure she'd closed it before bed, but maybe she'd forgotten. She shrugged it off, made coffee, and went to class. But the next night, it happened again. She woke in the dark, the door open a crack, the hallway beyond filled with shadows. She got up, closed the door, and locked it. She lay awake for hours, listening to the house breathe. A week passed. Mia tried to settle in, to make the room her own. She hung posters on the walls, strung fairy lights around the window, and bought a new comforter in a bright, cheerful pattern. But the feeling of unease lingered, a knot in her stomach that tightened every time she walked down the hallway. She started noticing things missing from her room, small things, at first. A hair tie, a pen, a favorite mug. She asked her roommates if they'd seen them, but they all shook their heads. "Maybe you left it in the kitchen," Jess said. "Or maybe it fell behind the dresser," Priya offered. Mia searched, but found nothing. One night, she woke to the sound of whispering. It was soft, urgent, just outside her door. She sat up, heart pounding, and listened. The voices were too low to make out, but she could hear the rhythm of words, the rise and fall of a conversation. She got out of bed, crept to the door, and pressed her ear against the wood. The whispering stopped. She opened the door and peered into the hallway. It was empty, the only light coming from the bathroom at the far end. She checked the other rooms, but her roommates were all asleep, their doors closed. She went back to bed, but sleep wouldn't come. The next morning, she found her pillow on the floor, as if someone had been sitting on her bed while she slept. Mia started keeping her door locked at all times. She bought a small safe for her valuables, kept her phone and wallet under her pillow at night. But the feeling of being watched only grew stronger. She tried to talk to her roommates about it, but they brushed her off. "Old buildings make weird noises," Jess said. "You're just not used to it." Priya suggested she try earplugs. Lila just shrugged, her headphones firmly in place. Mia started spending more time at the library, staying late to study, avoiding the apartment as much as possible. But every time she came home, the sense of unease returned. The hallway felt longer, the shadows deeper. She started seeing things out of the corner of her eye, a flicker of movement, a pale face in the window, a shadow slipping around the corner. One night, she woke to find a woman standing at the foot of her bed. The woman was pale, with long dark hair and empty eyes. She was wearing a dress that looked decades old, stained and torn. The woman stared at Mia, her mouth moving silently, her hands clenched at her sides. Mia tried to scream, but no sound came out. She squeezed her eyes shut, willing the vision to disappear. When she opened them again, the woman was gone. She lay in bed, shaking, until the sun rose. The next day, Mia did some research. She searched the address online, digging through old news articles and message boards. She found a story from 20 years ago. A woman had died in the building, killed by her roommate in a fit of jealousy. The details were vague, the names withheld, but the story was enough to make Mia's skin crawl. She confronted her roommates, told them what she'd found. Jess laughed it off. "Every old building has a ghost story," she said. Priya looked uncomfortable, but said nothing. Lila just stared at her, her eyes wide and unblinking. That night, Mia dreamed of the woman again. She was standing in the hallway, her dress trailing behind her, her eyes fixed on Mia's door. She reached out, her fingers brushing the wood, and whispered, "Let me in." Mia woke up gasping, her heart racing. She got out of bed, packed a bag, and left the apartment. She spent the night in a friend's dorm room, too afraid to go back. The next day, she called her parents and told them everything. They drove up that weekend, helped her move out. She left most of her things behind, not wanting to spend another minute in that apartment. Months later, Mia heard that the apartment was vacant again. The landlord was having trouble finding new tenants. She wondered if the woman was still there, waiting for someone else to let her in. Mia still dreams of the woman sometimes. She wakes up in the dark, her heart pounding, convinced that someone is standing at the foot of her bed. She keeps her doors locked now, wherever she lives. She doesn't take chances. She tells herself it was just a dream, just the stress of college, just the tricks of an old building. But deep down, she knows better. She knows what it feels like to be watched. She knows what it feels like to be haunted. And she knows when it's time to leave. Mark and Lisa had always dreamed of escaping the city. They wanted a place where the only sounds at night were the wind in the trees and the distant call of an owl, not sirens or car horns or the endless hum of traffic. When they found the house in the woods, it felt like fate. It was a 2-story cabin, all weathered wood and big windows, perched on the edge of a clearing and surrounded by acres of dense forest. The nearest neighbor was a mile away. The air was clean, the nights were dark, and the world felt far away. They moved in at the end of October, just as the leaves were turning gold and red. The first week was a blur of unpacking, arranging furniture, and exploring the trails that wound through the trees. Mark built a fire every night, and they sat together on the old leather couch, watching the flames dance and listening to the wind rattle the windows. Lisa baked bread and hung curtains. They talked about getting a dog, maybe starting a garden in the spring. For the first time in years, they felt at peace. But the peace didn't last. It started with the footprints. Mark found them one morning, just after the first snowfall. They were too large to be a deer, too wide to be a coyote. They circled the house, weaving between the trees, then disappeared into the woods. Mark followed them for a while, but they vanished at the edge of the clearing, as if whatever had made them had simply melted into the shadows. Lisa was uneasy. She said she felt watched, especially at night. She started closing the curtains before dark, locking the doors, double-checking the windows. Mark teased her at first, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there, just beyond the reach of the porch light. Then came the scratches. Long, deep gouges in the wood around the doors and windows, as if something with claws had tried to get in. Mark blamed raccoons, or maybe a bear, but the marks were too high, too deliberate. He set up cameras, but they never caught anything. The scratches kept appearing, always in new places, always overnight. One morning, they found a dead animal on the porch. It was a rabbit, its body twisted and broken, its eyes wide and staring. Lisa cried. Mark buried it at the edge of the woods, his hands shaking. They tried to ignore it, to focus on the good things, the quiet mornings, the long walks, the way the stars looked from the back deck. But the feeling of being watched grew stronger. At night, they'd hear noises outside, branches snapping, footsteps crunching in the snow. Sometimes, they'd see lights moving through the trees, too bright and too fast to be flashlights. One night, Mark woke to find Lisa standing at the window, her face pale in the moonlight. She said she saw someone out there, watching the house. Mark grabbed a flashlight and went outside, but found nothing. The snow was undisturbed, the woods silent. The next morning, they found strange symbols carved into the trees around the house. The symbols were old, unfamiliar, and unsettling. They called the police, but the officers just shrugged. Probably kids messing around, they said. But Mark and Lisa knew better. They started sleeping with a baseball bat by the bed. Lisa kept a kitchen knife under her pillow. They stopped going outside after dark. The house, once a refuge, now felt like a trap. One evening, as the sun was setting, Mark heard a knock at the door. He opened it to find a man standing on the porch, bundled in a heavy coat, his face hidden by a scarf. The man introduced himself as Tom, their nearest neighbor. He said he'd lived in the woods his whole life, that he'd seen things he couldn't explain. Strange things happen out here, Tom said, his voice low. You see lights, you hear voices. Sometimes you find things you wish you hadn't. My advice: don't go looking for answers. And if you see something you can't explain, don't try to follow it. Mark thanked him, but the warning only made him more uneasy. That night, the noises were louder than ever. Mark lay awake, listening to the wind howl and the branches scrape against the roof. He heard footsteps on the porch, slow and heavy. He got up, grabbed the bat, and crept to the window. He saw a figure standing at the edge of the clearing, just beyond the reach of the porch light. It was tall, impossibly thin, its arms too long, its head cocked at an unnatural angle. Mark blinked, and the figure was gone. He didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next day, Lisa found more symbols carved into the trees, closer to the house this time. She wanted to leave, to pack up and go back to the city, but Mark convinced her to stay. It's just kids, he said, though he didn't believe it. That night, the power went out. The house was plunged into darkness, the only light coming from the moon and the stars. Mark lit candles, checked the fuse box, but everything seemed fine. He sat by the window, watching the woods, the bat in his lap. He saw the lights again, moving through the trees, weaving between the trunks. They were too bright, too fast, darting back and forth like fireflies on speed. He heard voices, low and urgent, speaking a language he didn't understand. Lisa sat beside him, her hand gripping his. They stayed like that until dawn, too afraid to move. In the morning, the power was back. The lights worked, the heat was on, but the feeling of dread lingered. They tried to go about their day, but everything felt wrong. The woods were too quiet, the air too still. Mark went outside to check the generator and found more footprints in the snow, circling the house, leading to the back door. That night, Lisa woke to the sound of someone whispering her name. She sat up, heart pounding, and listened. The whispering grew louder, more insistent. She got out of bed, walked to the window, and saw the figure standing in the clearing, its eyes glowing in the darkness. She screamed, waking Mark. He ran to her, saw the figure, and grabbed the bat. He ran outside, shouting, but the figure melted into the trees, leaving only footprints behind. They packed their bags that night. They didn't wait for morning. They drove to the nearest motel, the headlights cutting through the darkness, the woods pressing in on all sides. They never went back, not even to sell the house. They left everything behind: furniture, clothes, memories. The house in the woods was no longer a home. It was a warning. Mark and Lisa moved back to the city, found a small apartment with neighbors on every side. They slept with the lights on for weeks, jumping at every sound. They told themselves it was over, that the woods were far away, that the thing they'd seen couldn't follow them. But sometimes, late at night, Mark dreams of the figure in the clearing, its eyes glowing in the darkness. He wakes up sweating, his heart racing, and listens for the sound of footsteps outside the window. Lisa keeps the curtains closed now, even during the day. She doesn't like to look outside. She doesn't like to remember. They don't talk about the house in the woods. They don't talk about what they saw, or what they heard, or the feeling of being watched. But they both know the truth. Some places aren't meant to be lived in. Some places remember. Some places hold on to things that should have been let go. And sometimes, the only thing you can do is leave. Alex had never been picky about where he lived. He'd grown up in a series of cramped apartments, shared houses, and for a brief stint in his early 20s, a friend's converted garage. So when he found the listing for a cheap one-bedroom apartment above a small grocery store, he didn't hesitate. The rent was low, utilities included, and the landlord, a gruff, no-nonsense woman named Mrs. Patel, threw in a discount on groceries. For a guy working 2 jobs and trying to save every penny, It sounded perfect. The building was old, wedged between a laundromat and a shuttered bakery on a quiet street. The store downstairs was open from dawn until dusk, its windows filled with faded posters advertising weekly specials and lottery tickets. The apartment entrance was a narrow door beside the store, leading up a steep flight of stairs that creaked with every step. The hallway smelled faintly of onions and cleaning supplies. Alex moved in on a rainy Saturday, hauling his boxes up the stairs and arranging his few possessions in the small, oddly shaped rooms. The living room was barely big enough for his couch and TV. The kitchen was a galley with ancient appliances and a window that looked out over the alley. The bedroom was at the back, with a slanted ceiling and a closet that barely fit his clothes. It wasn't much, but it was his. The first night, Alex lay in bed listening to the rain drum against the roof. The apartment was quiet, the only sounds the distant hum of the store's refrigerators and the occasional car passing on the street below. He fell asleep easily, lulled by the steady rhythm of the storm that he woke in the middle of the night to the sound of footsteps above him that at first he thought he was dreaming. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, moving from one end of the ceiling to the other. He sat up, listening, his heart pounding. There was no apartment above his, just the roof. He got out of bed, walked through the apartment, and pressed his ear to the ceiling. The footsteps continued, steady and unhurried. He told himself it was just the building settling, the wind rattling the old beams. He went back to bed, but sleep didn't come easily. The next morning, he mentioned the footsteps to Mrs. Patel as he picked up a loaf of bread and a carton of milk. She shrugged. "Old building," she said. "Makes noises. You get used to it." Alex tried to believe her. He went about his days, working at the coffee shop in the mornings and the bookstore in the afternoons. He came home late, ate dinner in front of the TV, and tried not to think about the footsteps, but the noises got worse. Some nights, he'd hear voices, muffled, angry, arguing in a language he didn't recognize. Sometimes, he'd hear laughter, sharp and cold, echoing through the apartment. He started finding things moved around. His keys in the fridge, his shoes in the bathtub, his wallet on the windowsill. Once, he found a message scrawled on the bathroom mirror in the steam. "Get out." He laughed it off, told himself he was just tired, that he was misplacing things, that the message was a prank. But the feeling of unease grew stronger. One night, he woke to the smell of smoke. He stumbled out of bed, coughing, and found the apartment filled with a thick, choking haze. He ran downstairs, but the store was empty, the lights off. When he went back up, the smoke was gone, but the message on the mirror had changed. Last warning. Alex started sleeping with the lights on. He kept a baseball bat by the bed, checked the locks on the doors and windows every night. He tried to talk to Mrs. Patel again, but she just shook her head. "You're not the first to hear things," she said. "But you might be the first to listen." He started asking around, talking to the other tenants in the building. Most of them kept to themselves, but an old man who lived in the back apartment told him a story. Years ago, before the store was there, the building had been a boarding house. There had been a fire, no one knew how it started, but 3 people died, trapped in the rooms above what was now the store. The building had been rebuilt, but some people said the dead never left. Alex tried to brush it off, but the noises got worse. The footsteps were louder now, sometimes running, sometimes dragging. The voices grew angrier, the laughter more mocking. He started seeing shadows moving in the corners of his eyes, reflections in the windows that didn't match his own. One night, he woke to find a figure standing at the foot of his bed. It was tall and thin, its face hidden in shadow. It stared at him for a long moment, then vanished. Alex packed a bag that night. He left most of his things behind, not wanting to spend another minute in the apartment. He moved in with a friend across town, sleeping on the couch, jumping at every sound. He went back once, during the day, to collect the rest of his belongings. The apartment felt colder, darker, the air thick with the smell of smoke and something else, something sweet and rotten. He found another message on the mirror. You were warned. He never went back. Months later, he heard that the apartment was vacant again. Mrs. Patel was offering a discount, trying to lure in new tenants. Alex wondered if anyone else would last as long as he did. He still hears footsteps sometimes, even in his new apartment. He tells himself it's just the building settling, just the wind. But he never stays anywhere for long. Some places aren't meant to be lived in. Some places remember. Some places hold on to things that should have been let go. And sometimes, the only thing you can do is leave.